Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bhairav Show. I have with me Dr. Oliver, and he's the head of AI at IU Group, Germany's largest private university. Welcome, Oliver, to the show. Happy to have you here on this particular episode.
Thank you very much, Suhas. Very, very glad to be here and nice, and I'm really looking forward to a conversation today.
Thank you very much. And just to give a brief introduction to everybody, Oliver holds a PhD and he's leading the AI efforts at IU Group. And he's also having his own consultancy where he guides various organizations towards AI and how they can transform their companies. And Oliver, can you start by sharing, an entire journey of yourself, starting from research and then machine learning, engineering, and then to a CTO, head of engineering, and your current role as an executive AI advisor.
Sure, of course. So, where do I best start? I started actually doing kind of like economics because I never really knew what I was going to do. So that's kind of like the thing you do in Germany if you have no idea what you're going to doing. And then afterwards, I felt like it's cool. It's nice. I learned a lot, but really nothing kind of like in particularly valuable for the future. So I decided, well, let's do a PhD in something that is actually interesting and specialize even further a little bit. And I did that. It was a great time at the University of Mannheim doing my PhD there. It was basically representational learning and marketing. So how can you use AI for deriving market insights for companies? 3 years, also was in the US for a bit, and then I transitioned, got into the industry, joined a startup back then called Oxolo, joined as a natural language processing engineer, and became the team lead soon after. Were building basically an Alexa in cool and for kids. If you know the time, that was pretty hard back then because it was 2020-ish, and then we pivoted. Then we basically built Synthesia, our one competitor, which was called Oxolo. Also raised the Series A with that of about 13 million USD. And yeah, I was the CTO during that time. We built the entire product from scratch, and it was a really great time, lots of learnings. We grew to about like 500-ish thousand euros. And yeah, we built that almost, I think, 2.5, 3 years ish. And then there was a decision to do another pivot, and that was my time to say, okay, the spirit is gone. I want to do something else. I joined another startup in the medical sector for a brief period of time, and then I joined IU, where I started basically as a staff engineer, and I'm now kind of like head of AI engineering in the AI automation team. And it is a fantastic time. It's a lot of fun, and doing, as you said, like a consultancy every now and then here on the side. And yeah,
Mhm.
that's the trajectory in total.
Thank you very much for the detailed information. And you being in the field of AI for quite a long time, you have seen how AI projects are successful at the same time how they are a failure, right? And many times it's
Yes.
not necessarily related to technology, but there's something else with respect to why AI projects fail. Uh, can you sort of explain more on this?
Yes, yes, of course. So from my experience and basically from my time building these solutions, the thing is oftentimes companies start with the wrong idea. And the wrong idea starts very early on in the process. And that is oftentimes the question, how do we add this as a feature? How do we add an AI as a feature? And for me, this kind of like symbolizes that you haven't really understood what the problem is about. Meaning, I see this kind of like from two different angles. Point number one is obviously from an organizational change perspective. So, how does AI affect your company in general? How do your colleagues use it? How is it being rolled out to other stakeholders? And how is kind of like your stance as an organization with regards to the usage and implementation of AI? Because for me, it's absolutely game changing, and for the teams I've been working with. And then the other question is, if you really want to add it as a feature, is your product even ready for it? Did you perhaps think of it, think this through clearly? Like, is it really just something that you bolt onto your existing product, or do you actually have to rethink or reimagine your kind of like core product that you are working on in order to see kind of like, does it really make sense to implement it? And the core question there then remains to be answered, kind of like, what problem are you actually trying to solve, right? And is your underlying data ready? Is your process ready? So just don't bolt it onto something where you're vaguely sure it might or might not work. You need to go into the details and understand the problem first before thinking about even just starting there, because it's a different kind of domain.
So then what do you think should be the very first question the top management needs to ask when they bring in an expert like you?
Yeah. So we actually I was coming from a small conference in Munster yesterday, and we were also discussing this. It depends on which of the two perspectives we take in, right? Do we take this as a product perspective, or do we take this as an organizational change perspective? And if we let's look at the organizational change perspective, and the first question here is, where do we actually stand, right? What is our stance on AI? Have we ever even checked with our colleagues? It depends on your maturity as an organization in the spectrum from, yeah, we are handing out Copilot licenses to people who ask to, hey, we have our engineers who are building custom skills and plugins and kind of like shipping new ideas across each other and kind of like brainstorming new ways of working and reimagining the team structure every kind of like 3 months because AI has changed so much that this is kind of like the first question from my point of view, from an organizational perspective, that makes sense to ask, kind of like, where are we even? How does the AI adoption look like? And if you're looking kind of like at a production or at an automation kind of level, what do we want to change? How do we want to move the needle? Which needle do we even want to move? Meaning, kind of like, if you're looking at this from a product perspective, what kind of like high stakes, high value problem, or from an automation perspective, can we actually tackle with AI, and how do we measure this? So everything around kind of like the core implementation, because you've made a good point. Yeah, technology is, for me, the technology is a solved issue for most parts. It's the stuff around that really makes it hard. Data, processes, governance, and all of this kinds of stuff needs to be in order. These are the questions to ask first.
All right, excellent. And you mentioned that there is discussion within the organization that, hey, I want this particular feature, right, within a particular product per se. So the initiative sort of comes in, but they don't really understand what does it take for a production level AI to be deployed,
Yeah.
right? So what do you think is actually the difference with respect to the definitions of an AI initiative that all the C-level executives talk about that they would really love to have, but in reality, what the production systems are?
Yeah. So an initiative for me is basically an announcement, right? It's a PowerPoint slide, if you want to kind of like, if you want to phrase it unfavorably, meaning that yes, you make an announcement for whatever reason, perhaps be it because you have investors who want to hear it, perhaps because the market needs to hear it. In any sense, it's an initiative is for me kind of the kind of like a letter of intent, if you want to call it like that. It basically just means nothing until you really do it. That's kind of like how I see initiative. For me, taking kind of like what separates the initiative from an actual kind of like production is the entire way that brings you there. Let's say you've decided you actually want to build something, and that could be, for example, a version 0, a prototype or something like that. That is where an initiative can then start to take action, and where you actually start to understand the problem. And then if you want to go to production, all of the stuff that comes afterwards, kind of like what's in classic software engineering, comes into play, such as delivering real traffic, delivering traffic at scale. And if we look at the core problem definition, do we actually move the needle? How are we measuring this entire cycle? Do we actually see that our customers or our users are making use of, for example, the tool that we're building, or kind of like are our internal employees adopting each AI in a sense? And this is kind of like what I see if we're talking about production systems, right? It's kind of like thinking of the entire end-to-end thing and making it reliable. Building a production system is far more complicated, and we've done that at for example at Oxolo, where we at the peak times where we're generating 10,000 videos a day, and that really then other stuff comes kind of like into kind of like into play, kind of like what happens, for example, if something goes off midnight and then you need to have people on call, and this is really what separates production from just, hey, let's build a feature and let's make it an initiative.
Okay. And when you say, let's build a feature, let's build an initiative, right? You would also sort of refer to systems or AI systems that actually ship into the actual production environment, right? So what are things that companies need to bold themselves with when they actually need to have a fully functioning AI system shipped within their environment? Is it technology, or is it the tutoring of the employees that needs to use the systems really well?
So for me, it ties neatly down to kind of like this one single question, right? If you can't measure it, you didn't ship it, basically. You just spent some money, you tested something out, you did not measure its impact, right? And this is kind of like where things are separating from, we just tried it out and it didn't work, versus, hey, we really went into the nitty-gritty details of, for example, a process, and we really understood it end to end, and we understood kind of like where it was standing in the middle, or it was at the beginning, and then we implemented our solution. We executed every little part of it. We tried to make it better at every single point. And then we were actually able to attribute, hey, it wasn't the AI that changed that made the process better, but an UI change, for example, because like literally not everything you need to ship needs to be AI. It needs to be kind of like move the needle. And sometimes that can just simply be, for example, a UI feature or something like that. That's sometimes much more helpful than adding another assistant or another chatbot to an existing product, which nobody really asked for because the core product was broken. And for that, you need to have the observability in order to, for example, then at the end say, hey, we have this, for example, we built an AI automation workflow, and now our customer NPS score was kind of like lifted by 10 points because we moved the needle with it. People are getting responses faster. People are more happy with their responses. People are kind of like closing, kind of like, or are fully satisfied with the answer that they get and do not have any follow-up questions. And for example, also the time to first reply has reduced if we're thinking about like classic customer support tooling that is aided with AI tools. And this is kind of like, for me, what really means, yes, you've shipped something and you've made a measurable impact, you've made a return on investment, right? Classic logic.
And what are the signals that actually show that whenever a project idea comes onto your plate, that it's worth building at all, and that too via AI? Because there are solutions which need not require AI at all. But what do you think would really need AI?
Yeah, there are a couple of signals to look for from my experience and from what I've also seen in the field, right? So the most obvious case here is high volume, high stakes. I've had discussions where people were thinking about, hey, let's, for example, add a chatbot for these kinds of questions, but then it was only kind of like perhaps 20 questions a week, and that's a lot of kind of like that. That's very little signal to build something for, and that's really not what I mean when I say high value, high impact. Is it kind of like sitting in core flows that your customers go through? Is it a high stakes application? Is it perhaps something that you cannot really get with classic logic based workflows? That's kind of like point number one, meaning high volume, high stakes. And also point number two then becomes, can we make this process measurable? Is it even measurable in today's standards, right? Because it might be that you have kind of like parts of your product, you don't even have the observability to see if you changed anything, or that the automation that you've built, it really doesn't matter because kind of like the process before we even started looking at it wasn't measurable at all, right? Because then it doesn't matter if you do not have a measurable baseline to build something on top of it that perhaps improves it, perhaps doesn't improve it, right? And this measurable baseline then also maybe informs the next kind of like part. What's the value of adding AI there? Because you sometimes see kind of like a shit process. Sorry for that, saying that in English here.
No problem.
A process that's severely broken, but then people start bolting onto kind of like additional solutions on top of it to automate something that was severely broken from the get-go. And then you amplify something that is severely broken at the output, because that is what AI does, right? It amplifies. It really amplifies kind of like your output. And that might be an engineer who kind of like writes code, or that might be an automation that wasn't like that was aligned with a broken process, and then you get kind of like even more broken outputs at the end, because it would have been much better to rethink this through. Does AI actually make sense here? Perhaps something deterministic is completely fine to build it, and that's kind of like the third point. And the last thing that we need to think about when we are building something like that is data and context. And this is where it gets hairy, right? Because data is a discipline, and data requires discipline, like operational discipline, to keep your data in check, because data means context for the agent. Like, how is the agent going to kind of like exist if all of the information is kind of like in the head of some user that has never been documented, right? So that could be one. This is definitely one thing. And the other thing is then to ask, right, you have now the idea, you want to build something. Could it probably be just a UI fix, right? Because sometimes it's much easier than just say, hey, just give the people a new, give the users a new feature, rather than shipping an entire AI on top of it, which makes things even more complicated. So these are kind of like my four-ish guidelines for parts, which I think are extremely kind of like valuable if you think about, does it even make sense to build something, or should we kind of like reevaluate each of these four parts?
Okay. And you mentioned about automation and agents during this,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
with respect to, let's say, people talking about running 20, 30 agents simultaneously on their production environments, right? What exactly, distinguishes a sort of a demo agent that runs on your laptop to a real production grade AI agent? And how feasible is it to run 20, 30 AI agents anyways?
Yeah. Also, this can be seen from multiple different perspectives, right? For example, if you think about just like code, I have multiple agents running, but they're not running on my laptop, but they are, for example, running in a pipeline, in a CI pipeline, in a GitHub Actions pipeline, and delivering me insights from specific fields I'm interested in. So these are, so to say, my personal agents. And then there are also other agents which are also highly individual and also belong to kind of like what you do. There I don't care so much versus demo versus production, because they work for you and they do not need to work for so many people. If you have them in production, and if you want to get them in production, I think there is one philosophical idea which I think applies in classic software engineering, but is now even much more important when you are in agentic engineering and in agent times, is that you lose trust way faster than it is built. And when you then distinguish demo versus production agent, right? A demo agent you can ship in an hour, right? Nobody cares. It looks good. It looks good in a meeting. It looks good in a board, but it has no guardrails. It has not thought about like evals or observability or something like that. And all of these core topics are really then what distinguishes something that runs in production versus something that's just a demo. You need to actually understand when you're losing trust in production, when your users are not happy. Like if you have looked into, for example, the leak of the Claude source code, you will find a regex that looks for common swearing words. And that's obviously when people lose trust in your production agent. And for us, it's the same thing, right? If we build something, we need to measure and get that signal. Are the users still trusting this production agent? And why aren't they perhaps not trusting it? And this can be due to multiple things, such as guardrails, context management, the traceability, how good is your eval harness, and what happens in case of failure. Do you have something to gracefully fall back onto? Because we've all spoken to agents in production where you wanted to kind of like solve, for example, a customer problem, and it was misguiding you in every other way. And the only thing you were desperately belonging for was talking to a human, right? And that's where you're then losing trust into applications. And that's, for me, it's really a trust engineering problem. And it's just like software, but way faster to lose it. And there are multiple ways of evaluating this. There's tons of research these days on what you can do. The most clearest part, for example, if we're talking about a simple classification agent, which just tells you, hey, this ticket, for example, belongs to that department, is golden data sets all the way. If you're building, for example, a routing engine, you have to have golden data sets where you say, okay, great. On the left-hand side, we have a couple of customer cases. On the right-hand side, we need to know where they go. And this is a golden data set. And then you can confidently and sleep well at night, because you know if the model goes down, you can just look for another one. You have the evals ready just in case, just to see kind of like, okay, we have all of this ready. I would even go so far as that some of these changes, for example, you change a prompt, you need to run these evals, and then you need to get a feeling for, okay, I added, for example, a feature in my classification, but it breaks our existing pipeline, and this is the kind of observability I'm talking about. Same goes for guardrails. Did you do some red teaming on your agents? Like, what happens if you throw at it stuff they were not prepared for to handle? And how kind of like does the agent respond to these kinds of inputs? And I know for like there was this, I've used it once in a proof of concept. There was a startup which was recently acquired by, I think, OpenAI, who was exactly doing that. And this is something also very much part of that process, hardening your systems and getting to know its fallacies, where you might have to think again and basically harden it even further for production applications. So yeah, I guess that summarizes it quite nicely.
All right. Okay. Then does that mean people are overusing AI agents, which could be solved with a simple, let's say, a UI fix?
You can just you can just look at LinkedIn sometimes, and people are very much overusing agents from my point of view. It's, if you've been on LinkedIn for a longer amount of time, then in the past you saw all of the people selling N8N workflows. And these N8N workflows, you had to comment on people's LinkedIn posts, basically, for specific N8N flows. But where are all of these people now? They're all now selling AI agents which do all of these kinds of stuff. But for me, it's kind of like, it's not a solved problem, right? Because when you try this, you will immediately see that this stuff fails in production quite often, and quite hard if it fails, right? And that's kind of like what I see is, it's same as also the big data wave, which was kind of like in the past. Like everybody tries to do it, and everybody tries to figure out something out, but these kind of like, I see these often kinds of demos, and it only really matters for me, like if you're hitting real user traffic, if you're really making an impact for the users, or does it kind of like die in an edge case, and then the trust collapses. So that's kind of like why I see people, I think, are overusing AI agents a lot. And it's obviously nice and fancy to now throw AI agents at literally everything. But hey, I see it as two paradigms, right? Sometimes a lot of problems you can solve completely deterministically, be it, for example, a user interface, be it, for example, some nice routing logic, or some other form of deterministic process that makes a decision. And these are all valid tools. And only then at the very end, you can really think, I think, about AI, because AI comes with a lot of fallacies, a lot of problems that you need to tackle. So it might sometimes be a lot cheaper to say, hey, great, let's just update our UI and make our core process better, than rather like slap AI on top of it and frustrate the user even more, right?
Mm.
And that's what we see with a lot of AI companies these days, which try to slap on AI onto everything. Like from my perspective, Microsoft is a fantastic example, slapping AI on literally everything, and the users have never asked for it, right? And that causes a lot of backslash, a lot of fatigueness, which you also then now recognize. Even for me, kind of like it's like, oh, it's another AI feature. Well, great, nobody asked for it, and
Sure.
that's what I also see with like colleagues and people who are kind of like not in the field. That it's kind of like there is this fatigue. People don't want more features, but they want actually better products. And AI is just one another tool in that box to make a product so much better. And yeah, I think that summarizes it nicely, because yes, people are overusing AI agents, slapping them perhaps onto products which aren't even ready, which are deficient in the first place. Just look at some of the core Microsoft products. And then people get obviously very angry, because that's what they ask for. They just want to have good products that satisfy their needs and that solve a problem for them, because that's ultimately what they pay for, right? So yeah,
Mm.
100% overuse.
Okay, you are mentioning about, Microsoft just overusing AI everywhere, right? So
Correct.
what do you think, these technical leaders behind such organizations underestimate when they would want to start a project like that? Is it
Mm.
they believe that they have done immense user research, or is it something else altogether?
So as I said, I think the tech itself is solved for me, right?
Hmm.
You with if you choose a model that is powerful enough, it is usually capable of. I think I haven't seen a case where a model has so significantly failed that it was not capable of doing anything. So for me, this is more or less a solved problem, which brings it down to kind of like what I said in the beginning. Is the discipline of context and the discipline
Hmm.
of data, if you want to look at it like that way. Your users are complaining about X, Y, and Z. If you can measure that, great. Align your product strategy accordingly, figure out what's wrong, and improve the quality. Versus just slap AI on top of it and then just go for it and see if it sticks. I
Hmm.
think this is kind of like, this is, I think, the complete wrong strategy. It has to work together, it has to work end to end. And that is also where I come back to kind of like what I originally said, is that you need to rethink your product entirely around the question, okay, is it AI native, is it AI ready, and does it really make sense to integrate it? Because if you, for example, sometimes use some of these agents, let's say it in certain applications, they are not even capable of doing some basic UI features and then ask you to click through the UI. So
Hmm.
what's the point of having that, right?
Sure.
It even give you sometimes wrong information. For example, it may cite something from training data that is long obsolete but still pertains to the product at hand, and citing long deprecated features, and that's kind of like the worst thing you can do. So it all boils down to data and context discipline. Do
Hmm.
your users want it? Does your workflow support it? Where is your company standing? Does it have enough context? And I think I've recently read that on LinkedIn. Um, this is kind of like the core idea, and I think this thought affects the entire idea of implementing AI.
Hmm.
Don't see it just as a tool, see it as an organizational change, and see it as a new product paradigm. And then it becomes kind of like four pillars, which is data, processes, tools, and the rules which the AI needs to follow. And if you can provide that in a kind of like sufficient and in a qualitative manner, and then you are basically, I think, set up for way more success than just thinking of it just like, hey, we throw it onto our product and see if it sticks. And if that means you have to, for example, refactor your entire 5,000 document kind of like documentation in order to make it AI ready, so be it. But that's kind of like the discipline you need in order to build something that truly makes a difference for kind of like your users, which will ultimately end up using these solutions.
Hmm. Okay, so that brings to my last question, wherein where is it that the companies must never use AI, at least for now, right?
Yeah,
So even if it's possible.
that's a good question. And it's partially dictated by some of the regulation, right? EU AI Act is one of them. But in general, this is on a case to be evaluated on a case by case basis, because some companies have very good ways of managing their guardrails around this application. But in general, for me, the gist is if it's high stakes and it's untraceable and you can't explain why stuff happened, don't use autonomous AI. Always keep a human in the loop.
Okay.
Always. This is kind of like, is it crucial to your core business? Is there, for example, a high stakes, like what is the probability that something goes wrong, that an AI misjudges, and how big, multiply that kind of like by the outcome, what happens if the AI misjudges something? And these are really also some parts of the EU AI Act where you have to say, okay, high stakes, autonomous decisions have to be really under scrutiny, and you have to carefully consider if you should not put a human into the loop. Because from my experience and from what I've seen in the industry, usually in the beginning, it always starts with a human in the loop anyways, because perhaps the problem is not even completely understood yet, and there is kind of like some blank spots that you need to fill in first before you can roll out, and then you have to have humans in the loop beforehand anyways. So this for me is always kind of like one of the core premises to start with. For example, something that might not be critical is something where it's not user facing, where you're perhaps routing tickets from input to the specific departments. But then
Mm,
if you make, for example, really high stakes decisions, hey, is somebody, for example, legally allowed to do this? Or is kind of like, are there any legal requirements behind this decision? Then you really have to nail your process
mm,
and make it traceable, make it understandable, who did which decision when, and was there a human at the end in this loop which could kind of like approve this process and sign this process off. And this
okay.
is where you kind of like, where to not use AI is kind of like, it's a little bit different from what you ask for. Because I said high stakes
Mm,
application, I still think you can use it there, but you have to see it differently. You have to see it as something that supports your ultimate decision, right? And that can
mm,
be also something that you do on your daily basis, where you do, for example, you want to buy something expensive, you want to make an investment, but the ultimate decision there lies with you and not with the agent you've been using, or with the agent swarm that's
mm,
been researching stuff for you. Exercise your own kind of like your own understanding, exercise your problem solving skills in order to figure out, well, is this kind of like the problem that we have at hand, where we should be delegating this to AI or not? If I'm just writing code, for example, that's not a high stakes application in most of the cases. But if you're doing really life critical decisions, there I would be really careful in rolling that out, especially if you want to kind of like do it in dark mode and not kind of like
mm,
trace it and just have it process stuff while you're doing something else.
mm.
Yes.
All right. And yeah, thanks a lot, Oliver. I think we have come to the end of the episode, and thank you so much for your time. We have covered almost everything that we would like to cover. And yeah, it's been an amazing conversation. And thank you so much for the entire knowledge, for sharing your experience throughout the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you also very much for the pleasant conversation. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you very much, Oliver.